Okay, well, that was quick. And my family's usually the last one to leave a party, so, I'd still be in the back socializing with somebody. So welcome to the Economic Development Symposium here in Danville-Boyle County. My name is John Bevington. I am Director of Business and Economic Development with LG&E and KU. I've been with the company for about 3 years now. Prior to that, I was with the Economic Development Cabinet for the state. I spent about 9.5 years there, most recently as Commissioner of Business Development. So I spent a lot of time throughout Kentucky, including Danville and Boyle County, and always appreciate the opportunity to be here. I was asked to be a bit of a moderator today, so I'll be maybe emphasizing some points, try to provoke thought for the audience out here today. You've got an all-star cast and lineup of people that are going to speak to you today on various different topics related to economic development. So again, let me just say thank you. Thanks for the invitation for me to be here and be a moderator. Normally, I'm given a presentation, and all the preparation that goes along with that and so forth. I'm glad to be able to give some zingers to these guys today. Come up here, maybe tell a few jokes and keep you guys entertained. So I appreciate that opportunity. I'm proud to represent LG&E and KU. We've been in the economic development business for quite some time. My staff has 32 people on it. We do, different things for communities regarding renewable energy, electric vehicles. We service some of our major accounts. We have about 400 major accounts, which include 2 Ford plants and the Toyota plant and UPS and steel-making companies and much of the industry here in Danville and Boyle County. So we appreciate that opportunity. I want to congratulate the community on setting this up. I know that's not been just a one-person effort, but I know some of you have been involved in setting this thing up. I think it's really, really important to sit down and hear from leaders and think about what role you all individually have to play in the economic development landscape. I used to give presentations at the cabinet titled, "What is Economic Development?" Because it is everything. And every time there's an election or every time you read the newspaper, there's something related to job growth, a job closing, new businesses starting up, ribbons being cut, all kinds of things that go into it. And there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. And so really, economic development is everything. It's all around us, right? We want our communities to thrive. We want our families to have a great place to live and work and grow up and stay in our communities. There's so many different facets to it. And again, today, you'll hear from leaders within each different facet or sort of a silo of economic development. What I think you all need to be doing in the audience today is thinking about, what role do you want to play? I heard a wise man once say, if it's everyone's job to answer the phone, who answers the phone? Right? No one. Everybody has a role to play, but you can't do everything. That's just reality. Your community is your storefront. Your community is much like a retail business in these days and times. Economic development is probably the most competitive thing. It's the most competitive profession that I can imagine being in. And every community, every region, every state, every country has an economic development plan of some sort. Some are better than others, but every community has it. So what do you have to do to be the best? You have to think about what role you want to play. You've got to organize it. You've got to build strategies around each of those individual arenas. And again, as you hear these messages today, think about where you want to be in it. But what I hope you don't walk away from is, I want to be involved in all that, because that's not efficient. It's not what the best of the best places do. The best of the best places work together, and each of the individual responsibilities play off of each other, and I think that's what you'll hear from today. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I'll, again, re-emphasize some points that you may hear throughout the course of the day, but again, I congratulate you on taking this step. I congratulate you on thinking about it from a holistic perspective, and again, I'm really glad to see some of the speakers that you've got lined up here today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Wooldridge from Murray State University, and he's going to share his message with you. Chris?
All right, thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you this morning? Well, that was great. You all have had coffee, haven't you? or at least some kind of liqueur or something this morning to get started, right? Well, I just want to thank you. I've got just to kind of set the tone, we're going to talk up until about 9:50, and so if you'll kind of jot down your questions, we want to be sure we get a few questions in. We've got a great presentation at 10 o'clock, and so I want to be sure that we get plenty of time for that. I've been asked to kind of stay in this general area, so I assume the microphone's going well. And since this won't catch COVID, I'm going to take my mask off so you can kind of understand about half of what I say, since I mumble most of the time. I've been given less than an hour to speak, because if I give more than an hour speak, I have to give a test. That's just the way we are at Murray State. Any speech longer than an hour requires some kind of pop test or test. That was a joke. That's my only joke for the day. So apparently it didn't go over really well. But thank you so much for being here this morning. My name is Chris Wooldridge. I'm the director of the Center for Economic and Entrepreneurial Development at Murray State University, and I'm also an instructor at Murray State University. And we are so proud to be here, and I want to thank Earl and all of the team who made this happen. This is the kind of work that great communities do. This is the kind of work that communities that are going to go forward, be successful, these are the communities that are setting the stage for success. So I thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey on this. I won't give you a long, drawn-out repertoire of myself. I will just share with you that my information's on LinkedIn. Most of it's true. But my background is not necessarily 100% academic. And I'm going to share this with you just so that you feel like I've got some credence here. I bring some realistic, practical application experience to the talk that I'm going to give you, that this isn't just a professor standing up here who's not been out. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I think what we see in our education journeys is that it's great to have folks on both sides, those that have been out doing and those that know how to do, and that two-part is very important. So my background actually is in entrepreneurship and banking. So I come from the corporate banking world, did 25 years in banking, don't hold that against me, but I've seen a lot of deals and done a lot of deals. And I do a lot of turnarounds. I work with a lot of companies on fixing broken companies, working with EDCs, and in that banking background, I really got to see economic development as a really cool career. And we see that as a very cool career at Murray State. We just unveiled, just recently, within the last couple of years, a Master's of Science in Economic Development, because we believe that much in how important it is for economic development to be out in our communities and to create that career path for those that want to continue to grow. And so my background in banking kind of helped set the stage for entrepreneurship, which my wife and I have owned a number of businesses before, so I've been involved in making payroll and buying inventory and doing all of those things as well. And I started with Murray State in 2008 as the director of the Small Business Development Center there, and then we moved from that into creating our own Center for Economic and Entrepreneurship and partnering with the SBDC. And so we work with startup businesses, existing businesses, and industry, as well as I instruct. So I teach in finance, economics, economic development, banking. All that being said, that's just to kind of give a little bit of comfort level for you that what I'm going to share with you comes from somebody who's kind of been around, okay? And I don't mean that other than just to say that it gives me, I hope, a little bit of credence with you. And so what I want to share with you quickly are some of the points that I'm going to throw at you for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to put a lot of information on your radar screen. I'm going to put a lot of information on your radar screen. I'm going to talk about some resources, and I hope that this leaves you with more questions than answers. If I've done that, then I think I've done my job, okay? Because you're all leaders. You are by virtue of being here, the position, and that you've been reached out to be here. So you're here because you are a leader in your capacity. You are important to this community and to this region. So I'm going to, like I said, put a lot on your radar screen. These are quickly some things that we're going to cover. But I want to start with one question. Why is economic development activity important to us? As Mr. Bevington said, it's everything. And in a way it is, because in our classes and in our practical application when we work with communities and EDOs, et cetera, we talk about the importance of economic development, job creation, job retention, quality of life establishment, wealth creation. Those are things that lay the groundwork for a community to grow and move forward, and they can't move forward without those things. So community development and economic development, depending on the size of the community and the different and the uniqueness of those communities, can really contribute to those two areas. Well, I would say that here are two really, really good reasons: our job creation and job retention, and our tax base. By the way, we'll make this PowerPoint available to you, so if you don't have it, that's fine. I'll make sure that you get it. There's nothing sterling about it because I did 90% of it, so it can't be that impressive. It's more informative than colorful, but hopefully it cuts to the chase. Job creation, job retention. Why is that important in your community? Because working people are happy and they pay taxes. And happy people make happy communities, and people want to live in happy communities, so they buy property, and those property values increase, which triggers these. As you can see, here are some reasons that we talk about in class and then when we work with consulting, on a consulting basis with our communities. Social stability, which allows people to save, spend, and invest. This is what you want people to do in your community. They do three things with their money. They save it, they invest it, or they spend it. And if they're doing those things in your community, they're not doing those in other communities. And so that grows your community. It helps create wealth, expands and strengthens the middle class. The middle class is the engine of any community. The middle class is the engine of any community. And so we have to look at what contributes to their growth, and that's what we need to do, is make sure that we're creating those employment positions and opportunities to create wages that give the middle class the ability to have disposable and discretionary income so they can save, spend, and invest. Reduces poverty and the need for social programs. They can pay taxes, and for those of us in elected positions, those are really great, right? Because we like new roads, we like to buy police officers and fire protection and all those things that we're expected to do as elected leaders to provide for our constituents. That provides funding. And then the tax base. Outside of the individuals who are paying taxes, we've got businesses that pay taxes and property taxes. And so again, I think we see the benefit of that. Let's talk real quick. I want to set the stage about what this economic recovery is going to look like. I took out a bunch of slides, and you're going to say thank you if you saw those slides because they're really slow and kind of boring. But we all know what our challenges are, right? COVID, we've got immigration issues, we've got employment issues, we've got tons of issues. But one of the questions I get is, what is this recovery going to look like? So here are 4 things that I would just mention to you about what our economy is looking like. And we all live in this economy, whether we like it or not. We all swim in this sea. What happens in the economy happens to us. The bigger communities may impact a little differently or more so. It's not a question of if, it's a question of magnitude. And so what are the 4 areas where this recovery is a little different than what we've seen in the past? If you're a student of economics, or even if you're not, you know that business cycles and nations and the world economy has cycles. Deterioration and growth. Deterioration creates factors that create more deterioration, and we have recessions, et cetera, and then we hit bottom and we start to grow out by looking at those factors that we can grow out of. Our first is we've got a culture cycle shock that's going to be a little different, okay? And why is that a little different? Because we don't have the deterioration in the economy that put us in a recession. The pandemic put us where we were, right? So it's kind of like turning off the car when it was running really, really well, right? It's not like we ran out of gas or the oil kind of overheated the engine or we ran out of water. We didn't go into a deterioration. We just shut it off. And so now this cycle is that we're just turning the car back on in a lot of areas, right? Now we're going to have some supply issues. We've got some inflation issues, and I'll mention, but we don't have a deteriorating economy that we had to replace, at least not yet. We just turned off, and now we just need to turn it on. And that's going to pick up speed, and I've tried to bold these just as I mentioned here. The underlying financial factors derived from a strong economy are largely still in place. If you remember back before in the middle of 2019, what was unemployment? What was inflation? What were interest rates? What was the growth, the GDP? It all looked really, really good. And so we went from that to full stop, or kind of sort of full stop, and now we're trying to get back up to speed. So those underlying factors are there. Now we do have some deterioration in those and how we've tried to turn those on, but largely we're still in a good shape. Funding. You know, typically what happens when we have a deterioration in the economy, we lose jobs, we lose earning capacity, we lose employment, and so people have to reposition themselves in the economy. Well, that really didn't happen this time. Why? Well, because there was a lot of funding that went on, right? We had a lot of money come out of the national government that helped keep the economy, at least on an individual basis, funded. People kind of had money to spend. And so we broke this typical employment linkage with income. right? To pull ourselves out of a recession or a deteriorated economic status, we had to go get a job to get income to pay bills and feed kids, right? We didn't necessarily have that linkage because the government's injection of funds, which kept the economy from taking a deeper dive, was able to keep us moving. Now, it may have been a little herky-jerky and clunky in some places, but overall, it still moved forward. So what typically would be driving us to employment to gain income, those pressures aren't there. And we can probably see that in some of our employment challenges that we're seeing, at least with some businesses that we're working with. Households, typical recessions see deterioration in households. We see that as costs start to burn up savings. We see an overbuild of housing. We see a lot of issues that really affect households. We don't see that in this economy, at least not to the degree that we normally see in a recession. What we see here are savings rates really climbing. They have climbed. Why? Because a lot of us have gotten money in the economy that we didn't spend, right? We got checks or whatever we got. That income went into savings more so than spending. So we saw large savings, and we're seeing increases in businesses, startups. And another thing that we see is banks are not having to work through failed loans. Typically, when we start seeing recessions and deterioration in the economy, we see banks starting to loosen underwriting requirements, so they start making riskier and riskier loans, and then those loans start to crash, and then banks go through a period of trying to clean up their books, right? If you think back to the financial crisis, it took us basically 72 months to get the banks cleaned up to the point where housing could now be funded and we could start getting back into building housing. We don't have that problem this time. Again, we just turned the car off. It didn't shut itself off. And then 4, we've got some pitfalls. Some of this rebound is going to be nice. Some of this rebound is going to bring us some challenge from an economics and a finance standpoint. What I've bolded here is people have money to spend and there's not a tremendous amount of time being taken in the economy to get back to growth. When we turn the economy back on, when we start getting out of lockdowns, we start putting ourselves in a position where we're trying to get whatever the new normal looks like underway, we got money to spend, right? People want to buy cars. Well, we can't get cars because we can't get chips, right? We want to buy stuff. Well, it's in the supply chain. The supply chain was shut down because of COVID 9 months ago. We're trying to get people back online. We're trying to get the process back up. So we're all going places and we can't buy stuff. That's pressure on inflation, and that's going to be an issue. Inflation is the general rise in most products and services prices, and we're going to see that. We're also going to see pressure on wages. And we are, because again, we have high savings rates. We have folks that are taking time to change into different careers. We saw quite a bit of that during the recession where people were moving to different jobs because guess what? They had money in the bank, either through government injections or whatever the case may be. So let's talk about some things that are going to affect. So I talked about the economy. Those are some changes we're going to see. What are we looking at workforce? Well, there are some short-term and long-term things that are happening in our economy that you as leaders need to kind of keep on your radar screen. Number one is this COVID accelerated automation, okay? Who has not had to do a Zoom? Has anybody been able to get by without doing a Zoom? Has anybody gotten by not doing 1,000 Zooms? Because I feel like I've done at least 100 a day. But we learned really quick how well to use the technology we had and make it work. And then we found out a way to take what worked and make it better. So we were forced into innovation, right? We were forced into using technology. And so what that has done is that has caused us to figure out, you know what, we can do that with a robot, not necessarily need people because we had to, right? Because they couldn't come to our shop or they couldn't come to the manufacturer. So we started to learn that. Now, some of the information I'm going to give you, you're going to have to take a little bit on faith, but I would refer you to some of the reports that I'm going to mention. If you're not familiar with the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, I suggest that you take a look at that. That is a wealth of information. That's kind of my secret pool if I go to look for stuff like white papers, what's going on in the economy, and other things that are coming out of this. Tremendous amount of great material. Some of it's not so hot, but this is information. These next few slides come from the NBER. Positions of low wage and basic education requirements are the highest likelihood of being replaced with automation. And the virus drove us that. We're seeing more AI. We're seeing more computer-driven automation, basic electronics-driven jobs. And they're going to take over those jobs. The replacement of technology into those jobs is going to be becoming more and more apparent. Women's roles are approximately twice as likely to be replaced with automation than men's. That's just a report. I didn't make that up. But there is a lot of exposure there. There is a lot of concern about this because of this apparent indicators from the research that those positions are being replaced more. COVID-19 will accelerate the automation. Robots and computers are unaffected by virus. I'm not sure why I still have that in there. That was a really brilliant statement. And the research areas that we're looking at where the most likelihood of replacement at lower wage, basic education entry levels are, as you can see here, I hope you can see there, Heartland and the South, okay? So we have to be concerned about that. We have to be on our radar screen. I hear a lot about robots and immigration. Again, more reports that are coming through about what is this next workforce looking like? What does our employment basis look like? Industrial robots will continue to replace low-wage and basic education requirement jobs. As we look at China, for whatever reason, and we have reshoring coming back of industry and manufacturing, et cetera, that 1,000-employee manufacturing facility that went over to China is not coming back with 1,000 people. It's 100 people. Because those folks are working on technology. They're keeping the robots that are doing whatever it is that's going on in the manufacturing or in the industry. And so those tech jobs, those little higher level thinking jobs are what's getting hauled back. It's not the folks that are on the assembly lines near as much. Immigrant workers. I hear a lot about immigration and I get asked this. How much is immigration affecting us? Well, most of the research that we're seeing says that there is a trade-off of 1-to-1. So if we have someone that comes into the country and takes a job, we're basically seeing a 1-to-1 replacement. Is that a concern? Again, that's something we have to deal with. That's what our communities have to deal with and we as leaders have to address. But don't take off your radar screen that the automation is going to impact your communities more so than immigration is, okay? Now, that doesn't mean we don't want robots. It doesn't mean we don't want automation. It doesn't mean we don't want those manufacturing plants or other industry expansions in our community. We want those. Those are jobs. Those are typically higher paying jobs, and we want those. But we've got to be smart about what we can realistically do and what we can expect, because automation, industrial robots, AI are going to replace 2 to 4 people. So when you look out at your community and say, I have this workforce, and I'm recruiting, or I'm trying to do community development, economic development, and I'm looking at this population of people, what are their skill sets? What do I have to do to get them ready for these jobs that tell the robots what to do? I'm looking at 4 jobs instead of 1 from a replacement standpoint. And they're not going to go away if the robot, on the average, lives 12 years, okay? So when it's gone, okay? And so we don't need to be trying to do economic development, community development planning, thinking that, well, we'll just create a job just like they had, only without a robot or without automation or without AI or innovation. It's not going to come back. Those robots aren't going to die. All right, so here's some headlines we're starting to see. These are some of the studies. Millions of women haven't rejoined the workforce and may not anytime soon. This comes from an NPR station radio. Again, there's the link. I encourage you to listen to that. Former McDonald's CEO warns minimum wage directly contributing to fast food industry's automation push. So this is just an example of what we're seeing. This is kind of taking what I just mentioned and saying, what's the practical world starting to look like? Well, these are some statements that were made by the former CEO of McDonald's and the current CEO of McDonald's. And I'm not going to read all this to you. I'm just going to kind of point out a couple of things. By the way, I was sitting in line last night picking up something to eat at McDonald's, by the way, and don't tell my cardiologist, okay? It was, I just had to have something to eat, and a Big Mac just really sounded really good. By the way, your all's Big Macs are really good. I don't know what it is, but they were just delicious. But oddly enough, I was listening to the EKU NPR station, and it said that McDonald's cannot get truck drivers in London because they won't get their COVID shots, and so the truck drivers won't get hired by McDonald's, and so they're not able to deliver them. Well, guess what they're looking at? Automated trucks, right? Automated trucks. Now, I don't know about you, and I don't want to be as a sidebar, but driving over here last night, I passed a lot of 80,000-pound trucks. I don't know how about you feel about Microsoft driving those trucks, but I just hope they don't reboot somewhere at about 80 miles an hour trying to make a turn. But that being said, that was my second joke, so I'm done with the jokes. Y'all didn't like it, so we're done. Mr. Bevington, they're all yours now for the jokes. So what does it mean? Well, I'm not arguing for or against minimum wage. I do that off any recording. My personal opinion doesn't matter, but as an economist, it is an operating expense, it is an input cost, and it will raise costs. And how businesses adjust to cost is how businesses adjust to cost. And you'll see here, the fight for $15 minimum wage is directly contributing to the restaurant industry's push toward automation. So we're saying, fine, if you want minimum wage, McDonald's is saying, we're going to go to automation. Why? Because it is more expensive. And the bottom line there on the second paragraph, technology is always cheaper than people. Now that's a challenge. That's a challenge. What are your recruiting efforts going to look like? What is your planning going to look like? Because you have people in your community, right? You're here as leaders thinking about how do we provide job creation, job retention, quality of life, wealth creation in our community so we can move our community forward. And we have humans in our community. That kind of perspective is what's going through corporate America because it is looking at costs. Current CEO. McDonald's announced summer plans to raise the starting hourly wage to $17 per hour. However, the current CEO, the company is testing automated, voice recognition-based drive-through ordering systems with artificial intelligence. Have you seen this sign yet? We have it in Murray, it's in Paducah, it's everywhere. I got a little slip in my, again, don't tell my cardiologist, back about 2 months ago when I made my once-a-month run through McDonald's for that Big Mac fix, this was in my bag. And I said, you know what, I'm going to put this in my presentation. Why is this? Anybody know what this is? Anybody done this yet? You have? How'd it go? Super one, right? Went great. So we got an app downloaded that you can drive through, and correct me if I'm not wrong, but it will pick up your order, and then you pay for it, and you just go through the drive-through, right? No human interaction. In fact, even if you like, you can link your debit or credit card to the app. What could go wrong with that? Nothing, it'll be seamless. But do you see where we are? I don't know about you, but in Murray and some of the other McDonald's in West Kentucky, I'm not saying I tour every McDonald's in West Kentucky, but did y'all have the mailbox that had the applications on the outside that said, take an application at the drive-through? So in Murray, there's a mailbox at the drive-through in McDonald's packed with applications that says, please take one. Now, is that indicative of where we are in employment? Not in just in general, but think about these jobs at McDonald's. What does a McDonald's job or any type of entry-level job teach? What does it teach? Work ethic. Anything else? Dealing with the public. Think fast on your feet. How to do math, right? And so we have to be very cautious about what we are evolving here in technology, because are we removing some of those entry-level positions that teach some of those basic skills that we're saying our youth don't have? What are we going to do to make sure that happens? Okay, so where do we go from here? Very quickly, 3 areas I want to kind of burn through: rural areas, regionalism, and funding. So, first and foremost, it takes leadership. I'm a big leadership advocate. I'm a John Maxwell fan. I don't know if any of you all are as well, but I have all of his books, or most of them, even the ones he ghostwrites that he says he writes that he really doesn't. But this is one of my favorite sayings: everything rises or falls on leadership. Everything rises or falls on leadership, because without leadership you have no vision, and without vision you have no action. And so we as leaders have to take that mantle to whatever degree we have that mantle. Whatever degree we are leaders, we have to recognize that. And that's where it starts as you as a leader. What is my role in this community? Because I'm being asked as a leader to act as a leader, to act accordingly. And so we have to think as leaders. So in a community, anybody know these folks? We're going to talk about community real quick. Anybody know who these folks are? Anybody know who the ones on the left are? Oh, the Gates, absolutely. How about the ones on the right? Anybody seen the ones on the right? Mississippi entrepreneurs, right? How about the folks in the middle? You know who they are? You do? Okay. They're the money behind the ones on the right. It is right. Yeah, right. They're the money behind the ones on the right. How old do those folks look? They don't look like me, thank God, right? They look pretty young, right? And they are. I've met them. We've chatted. The guy on the left has a black 1976 El Camino with a 454 floor shifter in it. It's awesome. If you Google them, look them up, their story is they left the big time. And they went to Mississippi, they went to Laurel, and they look at communities because they wanted to live there. So they're not living in San Francisco. They're not living in our big communities. They're investing their money in the folks on the right to build our small communities and to build the uniqueness of our communities, okay? These 4 facts come to you from my economic development friends out of Texas. This is what they see. I've also met with some of my economic development friends in South Carolina. They'll tell me the same thing, and the ones in West Virginia, they tell me the same thing. Millennials are leaving urban areas, and they're moving to rural communities. Why? Well, they want to establish families. They've discovered that the rural paradise is a great place to raise kids. They're creating businesses, and they're investing in our rural communities. They are seeking communities that are fit for them. The folks in the middle told me that directly out of their mouths. Why? Large cities are experiencing what? You look at the news, right? You know, I don't have to go through what our large cities are having issues with. Doesn't mean we have to be anti-large city. It doesn't mean we have to be anti-urban areas. It just is a demographic shift that we've got to see and be realistic, and it's an opportunity for us as rural communities, because my heart's in rural communities. I'm interested in rural development and rural economic development, okay? I don't like seeing communities dry up, because I have some in my area, in my end of the state, and you have some here, and you see the kind of dreams and lives that just disappear overnight in some cases. They're leaving because of crime. They're leaving because of housing availability. They're leaving because they have deteriorating education systems. Transportation. I don't know about you, but I'm spoiled in rural America. When I go to Nashville, I can't stand sitting on I-24 for more than 10 minutes. When I lived in Louisville, we used to sit on the Waterston Expressway for 30 minutes. I can't do that. I'm spoiled. If I can't keep moving, I'm unhappy. People are moving for traffic, they're moving for others. And these 2 terms that you hear, oasis of hope and the opportunity to set free, came directly from folks from my Texas friends that said, this is what millennials are telling us. They're investing in their communities. They want to get out. They want to find an oasis of hope where their dreams can be realized. Their families can grow. And what a great opportunity in our communities to take folks that have high earning capacity, a desire to live in rural America, to act as cash injections and investments in our community, which is, what do our communities need? They need these folks. Every community has a quality of life. Your challenge here is to define it and sell it, because that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with communities that do this really well, and we have to continue to do that. Define your quality of life and sell it. You're building that community side. Every community has a story. Find it, define it, and sell it. 13 Ways to Kill Your Community is the name of a book you need to buy and read it. Town Inc. is the title of another book you need to buy and read it. If you haven't read those 2 books, please do so. I like the 13 Ways to Kill Your Community a little bit better, but these are both very good books, and they will speak to this. So think about your community. Think about what you're investing in. Bless you. Think about your community. What do you have? What do you have in your community that you can help? Where is your investment in your parks? Where is your investment in your Main Street? Where is your investment in the things that these people want to see when they come to your community? Do they want to see a boarded up downtown? Do they want to see heavy traffic? Do they want to see buildings that are falling down? No. Your investment in your downtown, your investment in your Main Street organizations, your investment in every community organization that improves this quality of life is important. And you need to make sure that you're investing in it, because the people on the left, they did. Anybody been to Waco? You been to Waco? Awesome. I fell in love with Waco. I've been to Waco. I've been to the granaries that Chip and Joanne have. The silos, I'm sorry, silos, thank you. The silos. I can tell you, if you haven't been there, it's amazing. Taking these, what almost anywhere else we would have run a bulldozer through and taken it out to the dump, has been turned into an economic engine just by having these two silos with a building set up. And when we were there back in I don't remember, a long time ago, about 3 years ago, a facility that is selling their stuff, packed wall to wall, commerce going on in Waco. A building that literally is half the size of this room, selling bakery goods, people lined up down to the Dr. Pepper Museum, which is also in Waco, by the way. A small community in Waco that is exploding because people were willing to flip houses, take that money, flip more houses, and improve the quality of life, invest in commercial, take that commercial, turn it into an economic engine. They got recognized by the national level folks, and now Waco is exploding. It's awesome. So it can be done. Laurel's doing it. Waco's done it. It can be done. Okay. Community. What do we need to be thinking about? So these are some things I put on your radar screen. Again, as leaders, we need to come together as a community. And so I suggest that, at least I make these suggestions to other communities and other groups, pull your folks together. Here's a list, just some ideas, mayor, judge executives, et cetera. All those that are involved in the direction and development of projects and leading the discussion and the direction of the community. Working together, coming together, building trust and cooperation is going to help your community tremendously. Doesn't mean you got to agree on everything, but you got to agree that you're in there for the betterment of the community. I have a lot of folks that just don't get along, but they get along where they need to grow the community because they're all in the same boat. And if they're shooting holes in the bottom of it, when it sinks, everybody goes with it. Real communities have a story, and they must tell it. They must tell it to draw differentiation and attention to themselves. I've got a friend who's working on, if y'all don't know Mark Welch, he's the EDC director over in Fulton. Fulton, Kentucky is as far to the west as you can get before you get to the Kentucky Island, we call it, okay? Mark is working on resurrecting, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but resurrecting the Banana Festival. Fulton was a huge, huge banana community for the transportation of bananas, because there's a lot of railroads that go through there. Now, who wants to be banana capital of the world? Well, if I'm in Fulton, I do. Because why? That gets your attention. It got every one of yours attention when I mentioned it. You went, banana capital of the world, right? Or whatever capital of the world, and you'll find that in that Town Inc. book. But finding out what it is about your community that gets the attention, gets on the radar screen of these millennials that says, I think I'm going to go over here and kind of look what this place looks like. It's just unique. It's just interesting. Older communities, what can be recaptured? Just like I mentioned in Fulton. Fulton's a very old community, but yet it's reaching back in its history to find what was cool. Look at Dawson Springs. Dawson Springs is a mineral, there was a fountain of well water there, spring water, mineral well. There's some work being done into that to look at, the mayor there years ago was looking at resurrecting that. It's something unique. It's in the past and it's cool. And this generation and these millennials are looking at that saying, that's interesting, I haven't heard that before. Welcoming atmosphere is a must, and communities must rediscover their pride and wear it proudly. Do not be the worst ambassador for your community. Be the best ambassador. We've got it great in Danville, and here's why. Be the ambassador for your community. Don't, hey, listen, you guys, you young kids, when you get a chance, get out of here. You don't want to be here. There's no opportunity here. Have you heard that? I hear it. I hear it in certain communities. No. You're sending out your best and brightest and then wonder why your best and brightest aren't here. Stop sending them out. Create the opportunities to keep them here and be the best ambassador you have for your community. Think about the progression of folks in your community. Okay, we all age. We all have different needs. Okay, we all have different needs in our stages. Those of us who are young, that get married, we need a house at this cost in this kind of general location so I can stay in my community. I'm going to have a family. I don't need the 2-bedroom, 1-bath anymore. I need housing. I need transportation. I need other types of services. I'm older, my kids are gone, I'm empty nesting, I need a place to kind of chill, I don't need to cut a lot of grass. And then I'm older, I just want to hit neutral and spend some of my years enjoying whatever it is I enjoy. Do you have these capabilities in your communities? If not, those people will move. Because if I can't get a house here for my family, I will go where I can get a house for my family. If I can't find a place here to retire, I will go somewhere else to find a place to retire. And then your downtown and Main Street organizations must be successful in creating communities, infrastructure, and commerce. Again, I don't want to read to you because you're going to get these PowerPoints, but just a couple of things I'll mention as we transition to economic development and entrepreneurship, because we got a long way to go and a short time to get there. That's from, anybody remember Smokey and the Bandit? Okay, economic entrepreneurship. I'm just going to point out one thing on this slide. Evidence is mounting that the smaller the community, the more entrepreneurship plays a role in developing the ecosystem necessary for successful community development and therefore economic development. Ray's going to talk about that this afternoon. No, 11 o'clock, sorry. He's going to talk about entrepreneurship and economic development. But I will tell you that when you look at a community, and Ray will share this with you, what can your community do? Do you want a 10,000 employee Amazon warehouse in Danville? Do you have the infrastructure? Do you have the housing? Do you have the capability to keep that here if it came here? Think about what you can do. And entrepreneurship can work in any community, okay? And so make sure that as you think about economic development, you're building the infrastructure for the community necessary to build larger economic development successes. And entrepreneurship can do that. Let's talk real quickly about regionalism. I get this quite a bit. I get a lot of questions about this, and I've boiled down one presentation to kind of get this into just a few slides. But some of my Texas friends are some of the best advocates for regionalism because they have communities like 3,000 or less, and they got a bunch of them, and they all don't have what they need, but all together they have what all of them need, and so they believe in regionalism. They don't have a problem with it. Sometimes we have a problem with regionalism. But I could tell you that into the 21st century, we got to think regionally, especially in our rural areas, because we all don't have what we need. And there's no reason not to. Regionalism is the opportunity to package an opportunity for everyone. Regional groups are head of individual communities because they offer more when they play together. If all of us work together in 4, 5, 6, 7 counties, we've got a better asset inventory. We've got better capabilities, better delivery, better workforce pools, generally speaking. And when 7 counties are competing against one, guess who's probably going to come to the table with a better package? I'm not saying it's every time, but you enhance your chances, right? Regionalism is not sacrificing your community or your career to advance others. We're not asking anybody to give up what their job is, right? You're hired to be advocates for your community. You're not giving that up to support the region. What you represent is what your community can bring to a bigger opportunity. And I'd rather have a bigger opportunity land, if not in my community, than a community really, really close, than on the other end of the state or the other end of the nation. So we have to make sure that we think along those lines. Everyone has their primary duty to their community. You get paid to be that EDO, that community director, the Main Street director, the chamber director. You're paid to be that. Nobody's asking you not to be that. But where your interests overlap the region, that's where you can bring some gas to the tank. Logistically, if you don't have it, you're probably not going to get it, okay? We're probably not going to get an international airport anytime soon in this area, right? And I had a Texas friend tell me that and said that was one of the first statements that was made to them when they got into economic development. Said, look, we don't have an international airport. We probably need to get one. And that EDO, that EDP went, what are you talking about? So that was a whole different community mindset. If you don't have a lake, you're probably not going to get one, okay? If you don't have the assets that you see other communities have, or winning communities, the projects that are being won by other communities have, then reach out and find those that have it and put it in your toolbox. So coming together and leveraging together all the tools that you need to be successful is what regionalism is about. Regions and regionalism helps you compete globally. It helps you compete globally. All right. Developing regional connectivity. Now, We've got about another 5 or 10 minutes, so I'm going to burn through a couple of things that I want to be through before I get out of here. But one of the things that I would mention or suggest you do is go to the National League of Cities website and pull up this report, Interregional Economic Relationships. There's a nice study on this report, and it's a quick read, although I printed it off in like 2 font, so it was like, I can't read it. But when we talk about connectivity and we think about regionalism, this is an approach where we look at the regional aspect and then what each community contributes up to the mothership of regionalism, okay? What can each community from a connectivity standpoint connect to the region? How do we reach out and connect and be part of the region? These are the 4 areas it mentions. I could do a class on any 4 of these, none of which you'd want to attend, but this is very good information. And this is something from the National League of Cities, especially for rural communities, that we should read. So I would recommend that you look at that. Our population, did I just shift past one? Did I just go back? Nope, sorry. Man, I just kind of skipped through a bunch here. All right. There we go. So there is the really poor graphic that I cut off the material that I had. And it shows the 4 factors that affect connectivity. That's connecting your community to a regional approach, okay, from a regionalist standpoint. Business ecosystems, where small businesses, workforce alignment, innovation, and cost monitoring. Planning and funding support, economic development districts, regional development organizations, et cetera. Infrastructure, who hasn't heard about infrastructure? And we all think broadband immediately, right? But also water, health, transportation, et cetera, and then housing and quality of life. You've probably seen this graphic in some form. This particular one comes to us from our friends at UK at CEDIC, and we see some population shifts. I don't know if do I have a pointer on this? Looky there, okay. So what does this look like right here? Well, that's the Golden Triangle, right? That's the Golden Triangle. And then what do we have down through here? We call this the Golden Corridor, I-65 all the way to Nashville. Those are areas that are super successful. They got large economic engines. We see population shifts there. Why is that? Because that's where the jobs are. But also look at this. Not every job is in Jeffersonville, right, or Jefferson County. Not every job is in Warren. Not every job is in Fayette. What happens to all these areas out here? Well, these are people that are moving closer to where the jobs are, but they're not living in downtown Louisville. They're not living in downtown Lexington. Now, I'm from Louisville, so I can say that. I've lived in downtown Louisville. Wouldn't want to live in downtown Louisville. I love Louisville, love Murray, love all my communities in Kentucky. But people make choices based on what we just saw earlier. What does a community look like? Maybe they live out in J-Town. Maybe they live out in some of the rural areas, okay? Look at those areas and look down through where that areas from growth are, but also look where our shifts are. Now, if you place yourself here, and I hope I got this right, I had a student worker work on this at the last minute, so if these counties are wrong, he's fired when I get back. Just let me know. I did a quick glance, but I think we're good. But if we take those numbers that we pulled from the census, and these numbers are not necessarily adjusted fully for COVID, so I'm going to give that qualification there, but if you were to look at regionally, look at the communities that you have here. At the very best, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 communities that didn't see any decline in population. And if they did, it's less than 5%, 5% or less. But then you've got, obviously, 2 here between 5 and 21%. Now, I don't know about 21%, but I'll buy into the 5%. So you've got regions that didn't do this, right? They're not over here in the red, are they? Okay. I'm about to give up because I'm making myself dizzy. But you're not in the red, right? And so look at your surrounding areas. What do your communities have that you need to all be successful? Well, let's look at an inventory. And again, this is a class in and of itself. But we can approach this by looking regionally, like we know all communities need to some degree to be successful to compete against those regions that aren't, those communities that aren't playing regionally, and look at these things. What is the economic condition in those communities? What can they bring to the table? Doing an inventory of their assets, their infrastructure, their people. Does everybody who works in Danville come from Danville? Everybody's shaking their head no. Nobody's saying yes. So you've got a work shed, a labor force somewhere outside of Danville, right? Where's that coming from? Do we know? We should. What's about that community? Why are they coming here? And how do we get the other communities to come here? What can we do to those communities to help rise them, to help rise ourselves? Okay? Regionalism, these are some potential projects. I get this asked question, well, what can we do together? You know, what can we be doing together to play nice together? Well, here are some things. Marketing and telling your story. You can tell your story about this region, whatever this region is, and you as leaders can pick that. You as leaders can help decide what that looks like. But what can you do about this region? I guarantee you, if you look to the north and you look to the west, there are regions that are packaging themselves and selling themselves. You need to come look at this area because, and then they tell a story. And yeah, they got the demographics and the psychographics and all that stuff, and here's our roads and our planes where they can land in boats and ports and all that, but they got to tell a story because everybody's telling about their planes can land here and our cars can go here. Where else can we go? What's the unique story? Education, can we get together on education and figure a way to lift the region? What other shared assets do we have? I tell the story that if you come over to West Kentucky and you look at land between the lakes, we've got a couple of big lakes. Who owns those lakes? Well, depends on which county you're in, right? That will tell you they own the lakes. Well, nobody does, but you've got Trigg and Callaway and Marshall. You've got Christian County. You've got all these counties around there that share this asset. 1 million visitors a year minimum into that area from a tourism standpoint. So there are just some areas that you can join. I don't have enough time to get through the EDA. I do want to put this on your radar screen. The information, the PowerPoint discussed the Build Back Better funding. These are the different funding areas that come through the ARPA. KAED has a great session on this. I think we recorded the last one that the EDA presentation was, so maybe we can get you connected with that and go through that. Before I leave you, I'm going to leave you with this. You need to look at this Build Back Better, and what is that next word? Regional challenge. It's not Build Back Better community, it's regional, and you can see from the graphics this. With that, I'm going to leave you with some takeaways there. You can see those. It's been an honor to be with you this morning, and I appreciate it. And since it's less than an hour, there is no test, but I will give you an assignment, so make sure I have your emails. No, I'm kidding. But real quick, any one or two questions before I get booted from the stage? Yes, sir.
Up until the very last few slides, I only saw the word education one time. And I may have missed it, but how important is education viewed by companies looking to relocate?
Well, it's tremendously important. And so when we think about, as leaders, what do we need to do? We need to look at through that inventory of what education level is our workforce now, what education level do we need the workforce to be, where do we need them to be successful in our community development efforts, but also our economic development efforts. So programs through our community colleges, through our regional and state universities, what projects do we need to have in place to educate those students and get those? And part of that is a community looking inward as well and saying, what do we want to recruit? If I want to recruit tech jobs, we got to make sure we've got tech training here. Are we working through FAME if we're working through manufacturing and industry? And so from an education standpoint, I have to get real careful on getting on that soapbox because we will run way over for that reason, is that education is super key. Communities grow based on education and economics. You have to have those two in your community or they won't move. So part of your challenge for all of you in education in this room and as leaders who aren't is to come together and say, what is a fit for our community? Are we going to be regional? And if we need to be regional, what programs do we have to have in place? And what are our pathways? And not just in that secondary education, but what are we looking at K through 12? And I'm about to go on my soapbox, so I will not get on it. But how far up are you reaching out into your high schools and your middle schools? Do you have teacher externships? Do you have programs to bring in guidance counselors into your industries and have them walk through some of these manufacturing facilities that are super clean and super safe and are great opportunities? And so without the education, the community won't go forward at all. And you have great education here. So definitely leveraging that is super key. Yes, sir. Thank you for the question.
You didn't mention healthcare anywhere in your presentation. Is it not important in your story when you tell your story?
Yeah, it's on,
Maybe I missed it.
it's back in where I talked about the four points from the national, where we talk about infrastructure. Again, trying to be cognizant of time. We've got health. So you definitely have to have that infrastructure from a health standpoint. Without that, your industries aren't going to come, especially their larger industries, because if they can't get some kind of health care, especially manufacturing and industry, you're not going to score well on those. Yes, super important as well. And again, there's a lot more to this, so I don't say there's not. Trying to get this kind of boiled down into what we wanted to cover and put on your radar screen. Some of this we're assuming that is already on your radar screen. Yes, sir.
We're a community of 30,000.
Uh-huh.
We have a deficit of 850 jobs and a deficit of housing. What's our first step?
Well, I think your first step is to come together as a community and decide from a plan standpoint, have you identified what those jobs are? Do you have the education that you need to support and get that skilled set or that labor force up to speed to fill those positions? What companies are going to provide those opportunities? And where will we get those folks if we need those training? Coming together through some kind of a strategic planning process, whether it's something fairly new or whether it's a traditional standpoint, but it's coming together as a community and taking that first step and deciding what do we want to fill and how are we going to get those. But it can't be just we got to go get one big box and bring it in. You got to look at what currently your education level is, what your workforce is able to do, and in the short term, target that. Is it entrepreneurship? Is it expanding an existing facility? Do we have a call program where we're out talking to our different industries and saying, are you looking to expand? Are you seeking to open some new facilities? Are you looking at your small businesses and saying, are you seeking to expand? And so you don't know what your community already has that might be able to create additional jobs. It's a whole lot easier to add jobs to an existing business model than it is to drop a new business model or to try to get someone to open a new facility. That's a 30-second answer to probably a 2-hour question, but it still comes down to leadership. It's pulling people in the room, identifying the problem, and starting to build solutions to that. I want to thank you for your attention. I appreciate the opportunity. Please reach out to us. Don't let this be an event. Let this be a process. And I am happy to be available however you need me. So thank you.
Chris, thank you. That was a thought-provoking presentation for sure. And I was taking some notes over there, and I was thinking about it. I want to put this in, put some of what Chris said into context related to, kind of the sexiest term of economic development is projects, right? Everybody wants to talk about projects. When are we going to get a project in our community? How are we going to land the next big project? What are we going to, we want to add 200 jobs, so on and so forth. And so, again, I want to go back to my opening comments, and you think about everything in the context of Chris's conversation and your community as a storefront, right? If you're opening a retail establishment, you're looking at the competition, you're looking at the supply and demand equation, you're looking at, how can you leverage traffic patterns to gain an edge? So think about, again, your community as a storefront. I wrote down, I think two of the key points in Chris's presentation. He said, what's your quality of life? And I can tell you, I've sat in rooms with international companies that want to hear a pitch, an elevator pitch or otherwise, from communities who are seeking to earn one of these project announcements, right? And almost every single community, and I was, benefited, I worked for the state and I listened to a lot of community presentations over my tenure there. And almost every community, and every community presentation they ever gave to a prospect, they said, we've got a great quality of life. Every single one of them. There's not a economic developer in the world who hasn't come into a presentation and says, we have a great quality of life. So what Chris said is, what is the quality of life? It's not just great. What is it? What sets you apart from those that you're competing with or those that you're working with? Back to the regionalism conversation. What's different here than in Springfield? What's different here than in Lebanon? What's different in Lebanon than here? And be complementary to each other from that standpoint. And what's your story, right? Same thing. Everybody says, this is a great place to live, work, and raise a family. I'm telling you, every community says it. What is different about the Danville-Boyle County story from that standpoint, right? It goes back to what's your target. If you're working regionally and you think about who your neighbors are and what they're doing and how you can complement that and how they complement you, you can tell a different story from that standpoint, right? I know for certain there was a community in the U.S. who built a network, an education system, an infrastructure system to build one of the major craft breweries. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company had a massive project a few years back, and they put a pitch out to the entire United States. Where are we going to go? They ended up landing in the community who said, we've been building the infrastructure to have a project just like this land here, and here's why. We've got the water and wastewater infrastructure. We've invested in that over time. We've got this kind of workforce training program, and here's what that is. And they told a very specific story about wanting that business that related to that company. Not, this is a great place. It was very specific. And I'm not saying that every community has to be that specific, but that's just an example, right? I will also say, back to the ambassador, who are your community ambassadors? Who are the leaders here that are going to tell that story for you? Nominate them, right? You should have certain people with a certain kind of energy and that tell the right kind of story to be your ambassadors. We can't all do it. And I will tell you, I've been in a community, and this is back to these project anecdotes. I think it's important for you guys to hear this. You have to have control over who's telling your story and what they're telling. And sometimes they'll ask multiple people. If they ask you, what are you going to say? If they ask you, are you going to say the same thing? And if they ask you, are you going to say the same thing? So everybody's got to be on the same page, because if they hear three different things, that's risk. So you have to train yourself to have an ambassador story and then nominate the people that are going to say it. I will tell you a very specific story. I was with a $300 million manufacturing project in a Kentucky community, and the local economic development professional, and it was not here, said to the client this: we've all got our warts. We've got a little bit of a drug problem here, but every place does. And he said, our education system's okay. We need more funding, and then we could do more. This was the economic development professional in this community, guys. So I'm saying, you guys, this community is doing a great thing with this symposium by thinking about what it looks like to gather and get together and build a story and nominate those that are telling it. Because again, you don't want to say something that's not consistent, and you certainly don't want somebody selling your community by being openly honest about the warts that happen to live here, right? Very, very important. And again, I think it's important for you guys to know that. So, and again, on the regionalism piece, I'm a huge proponent of this. It creates efficiency. It creates efficiency of cost in some cases, right? Every community's funding an economic development position or an economic development organization and a Main Street program and a tourism program and and those are things that are being funded in all these communities, right? Regionally, if you work together with your partners, you figure out what you're best at, put more money into that, and let them put more money into the thing that they're best at, and then work together. Now you've gained efficiency not only in process, but also in cost in some cases. And in some cases, you're going to have complementary things where you do have a little bit of competition. But I can guarantee you, back to the projects that I've worked, there's not one single community or one single company that I've ever worked with that said, we want to make sure we're inside this county line right here. This, where this line goes is the stopping point for me. They don't care, frankly. Again, I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult or say things that are negative, but they just don't care. So we might as well work together. Now, obviously, it comes down to revenue sharing and all these different complexities that go on in the course of it, right? And how that works if you've got industrial parks that go across lines. It's better to have leaders that figure that stuff out because companies can tell where there's leadership and where there's not. So again, I think it's very, very important from a competitive standpoint for you guys to hear that. So big on regionalism.